Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. Today we are looking at a horrific crime that took place in Maryland in 1995, which destroyed an innocent family and destroyed the feeling of safety held by a community for years to come. The case today centres around the Goff family. Irma and David Goff met in traffic school in Montgomery County after both had received speeding tickets. They both attended the University of Maryland, and in 1970, when Irma was 21 and David 22, they got married. They initially lived in the White Oak area of Silver Spring, where they had 4 children, 3 girls and a boy, within the space of 7 years. In 1986, they moved to Twining Lane in Potomac, an upscale suburb in Montgomery County. David was a hard-working podiatrist who often worked 6 days a week, whilst Irma managed his offices whilst juggling the demands of a young family. By 1995, their eldest child, 22-year-old Andrea, had just graduated from Washington University in St. Louis with a double major in philosophy and English literature. She had secured a place in law school at George Washington University, but, according to her philosophy professor, was leaning towards working in a government program for disadvantaged children instead. 19-year-old Sherry attended the University of Maryland, where she was studying nutrition and also worked at Nordstrom at the Montgomery Mall. Their third child, Scott, who was 16, was a senior at Winston Churchill High School. During the summer of 1995, he had a job at a grocery store near the beach at Ocean City, where the family owned a second home. The youngest child, 15-year-old Elise, also attended the Winston Churchill High School. She was very sporty, representing her school at cross-country and attending swimming and tennis camp. On July the 20th, 1995, Irma and Scott were staying at the family's condo in Ocean City. David, Andrea, Sherry and Elise remained at the family home in Potomac, where the family were having some decorating work completed on their home. That evening, Irma and Scott went to see a Sylvester Stallone movie before returning to the condo. They were asleep when the phone rang at around 2 a.m. Scott picked it up and was told that 5 bodies had been found at their other house. A couple of minutes later, a police officer knocked on the door of the condo. Scott had already woken his mother, and they were driven back to their home. They weren't given any further details about what was going on, and at every county line they had to switch police cars. The journey felt like it took forever. When they arrived back in Potomac, they received the devastating news that David, Andrea, Sherry and Elise were all dead. The 5th body belonged to the man who they had employed to do their decorating, 30-year-old Mark Aldridge. At 8:30 p.m. the previous evening, a 911 call was placed from the house. The caller did not speak and disconnected the call. Police officers were sent to the address, where they checked around the outside of the home. They could not find anything out of the ordinary, and when a neighbour told them that the family may have been on vacation, they left without further investigation. 2 hours later, at around 10:45 p.m, a second 911 call brought the officers back to the house. When they arrived, a man by the name of Bruman Alvarez, who was wearing blood-stained clothes, let them in. 20-year-old Bruman was a labourer who had been brought in by Mark to help decorate the family's home. Bruman told the police that Mark had killed David and his 3 daughters, and as a result, he had then killed Mark. Bruman's mother said in an interview with WUSA-TV that her son had told her that he had killed Mark with a hammer in self-defence after Mark had summoned him inside the house and asked him to help bury David's body. However, the evidence told a different story, and Brugman was arrested and charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. Whilst initially being unclear as to the motive for the attack or whether anyone else had been involved, the police soon began to unravel the entire story. Mark had completed decorating work for the family before and had also hired Brugman in the past. Irma had previously seen Brugman when he had completed some work at the couple's Silver Spring office and had asked Mark not to bring him to her home. With 3 daughters, she did not want any strange men hanging around. However, Mark had decided to use Brugman anyway. This was a decision that ended up costing him his life. More than 2,000 people attended the Goff funeral on Sunday the 23rd of July 1995. Eulogies from friends described a close-knit family who were active in their community. Following the service, the 4 family members were buried during a private ceremony at a cemetery in Adelphi. A private funeral for the decorator, Mark, attended by around 300 family and friends, took place the following day. His wife was 8 months pregnant with their first child at the time. Friends reported that because Mark did not have any life insurance, his wife was faced with imminent serious financial hardship. The neighbourhood were in shock. Resident Gary Bortnick said, "It's a close neighbourhood. Everyone knows everybody. You hire a painter and you die. This is unbelievable." Carol Merling, the county's police chief at the time, said, "Montgomery County experienced one of its most heinous crimes. This community has been shocked, angered and saddened by the brutal slayings. It is an overwhelming scene to look at." Meanwhile, Brugman was denied bail and a preliminary hearing was set for August 1995. Instead of Irma celebrating her 25th wedding anniversary with her husband and daughters, that August she was dealing with the loss of 4 family members in the most brutal of circumstances. At the hearing, it did not specify how the family were killed, why they were killed, or the weapon used. However, news reports soon emerged that an autopsy of the youngest daughter, 15-year-old Elise, showed that she had been sexually assaulted and had been found stabbed to death in an upstairs cupboard. David was bludgeoned to death with a hammer in the bathroom, and Mark had been stabbed to death in a basement bedroom. Andrea and Sherry had also been stabbed to death. Court documents showed that Brugman had told officers that Mark had killed the family, but that he admitted to killing Mark. He said that he had killed Mark at about 4 p.m. that evening and then moved his body from the first floor kitchen to the basement. Brugman also said that he cleaned up the house and tampered with evidence at the murder scene during the 7 hours that he spent in the house with the 5 bodies. He also admitted to stealing $40. In reality, Elise had been at the house all day, and when Mark left at around midday, Brugman sexually assaulted and killed Elise. Mark returned to the house at around 1 p.m, then David arrived at 2:30 p.m, Sherry at 5:30 p.m, and Andrea at around 5:45 p.m. As each person entered the house, Brugman attacked and killed them. By September, additional charges of sexual assault, kidnapping and armed robbery were brought against Brugman. The following month, the judge entered an innocent plea on behalf of Brugman, leading to speculation that his defence team were going to mount an insanity defence. The trial was delayed to allow the completion of further DNA tests and double-checking of facts by defence experts. In June 1996, it appeared that the case was going to have a swift resolution. A plea deal in which Brugman avoided the death penalty, but instead would be sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences. 1 for each murder and 1 for the sexual assault on Elise had been negotiated, but at the last minute, Brugman backed out of the plea agreement. He was upset at being photographed outside the courthouse and feared that his grandmother, who was in Ecuador, would see him in the handcuffs on the television. The Montgomery County State's Attorney, Andrew Sonner's hope of avoiding a lengthy trial seemed in tatters, and a Montgomery County judge had to issue an order prohibiting the photographing of prisoners anywhere on the courthouse grounds, including the car park. Irma had been supportive of the death penalty not being pursued. This was in the shadow of the O.J. Simpson case. She did not want a three-ring circus of a highly publicised trial and knew that the plea deal would still mean that Brooman would never again be a free man. The deal was eventually reinstated and Brooman was sentenced on Friday the 26th of July 1996 to 6 consecutive life sentences without parole. During his appearance before the judge, he broke down and apologised for the killings. Brooman remains incarcerated at the Western Correctional Institution in Cumberland, Maryland. Irma moved back to her home 4 months after the murders, and while some people questioned why she would want to be there, she found comfort from being in her own home with her possessions and memories. Then she had to do the hardest thing of all, rebuild her life, not least because she had a 17-year-old son who needed her. Scott would later say that his mum's therapy was her taking care of me, providing for me, sending me to college, throwing my 18th birthday party, feeding me. I led my life, and that's what she wanted. So whatever she did right. Attention following the murders made Irma uncomfortable, and she refused interview requests from the media and suggestions that she should write a book. She has only spoken publicly about the crime twice. In a television interview with NBC4's Wendy Rieger in February 2012 and a published interview in 2015. She remained living in Twining Lane for 6 years and even got remarried there 5 years after the murders. Despite the devastating events that Irma and Scott had to deal with that night, they have shown unparalleled strength in rebuilding their lives. Scott is now married with children of his own and remains very close to his mother. So that is the end of our story for today, but the sentencing in this particular case got me thinking. To avoid the death penalty, Brooman agreed to a deal that saw him sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of ever being released. Irrespective of your feelings about whether or not the death penalty should ever be an option, which punishment is worse? Brooman was 20 years old when he committed this crime, and so with an average life expectancy, he would probably spend around 50 to 60 years confined to a prison cell. If you had to make that choice, would you choose life over death? I would be very interested in your thoughts in the comment section below. So after I completed this case, I searched my email and found that a good friend of the channel, Steph Carlo, who's from Maryland, actually suggested this case to me on the 17th of November 2022. Thanks for the suggestion, Steph. Time to move on to petty crime now. Rebecca from Louisville in Kentucky has sent in Loki. His name comes from the Norse god of mischief, a 13-year-old that loves cuddles, even crying when he doesn't get to sit on your lap. Rebecca says he is a half Lynx Point Siamese and has a cat sister named Olive. Loki seems to love everyone he meets and even raised a litter of foster kittens, and he generously let them nurse on him. Thanks, Rebecca, and nice to meet Loki. Thank you for listening to The Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. Mark Aldridge, the decorator that was killed in this case, eventually became a father on the 2nd of August 1995. His wife Maggie gave birth to a girl at the Holy Cross Hospital in Silver Spring. Goodbye.